fact, I've got an episode coming out today actually, and I recorded it with someone I know quite well after going out for lunch, and we'd had a bottle of wine or whatever, and I thought, oh, this is going to be like really bad. I listened back and went, it's really good. It's a bit quicker. It's very natural. It's off the cuff. There's three moments where he goes, "What are we talking about again?" It's sort of like we lose our train of thought, but that's nice, Anyway, so there's something in it. Yeah. I don't know where I heard this, but I read somewhere that there is a business where when they're making important decisions, they will take a decision when drunk and they'll take a decision when sober, and only if the two data points are the same will that decision go through. Because I guess it's ultimate system one and system two, isn't it? People say exactly what they think could feel, when they've had a few.
It's a bit less filtered. Yeah, there's another guy who actually you can pay him to get wasted, like drunk, and then he goes through your website, and then he's like, the theory is if he can't navigate your website drunk, then it's too complicated and doesn't make any sense. And I think there is some method to that madness.
Yeah, yeah, there is, isn't there? Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like the company I work for, System One. It's all about getting to your instinctive, innate responses under time pressure, rather than your overly rational, thoughtful, um, you know, logical mind.
Anyway, sorry. Thanks for coming on the show, John. I'm a big fan of yours. So, yeah, thanks for your time.
Good to meet. Thank you.
There was this story about, I think it was Johnny Ives in Steve Jobs' office. I don't know how true this is, but they were brainstorming the session for one of the products that was coming up. And, Steve Jobs wanted to include like these, five key points into the ad, or the communications piece, and Johnny Ives is like, no, there's too many, it's too many. They were about to like butt heads, and then Johnny Ives is like, okay, and he scrunches up five pieces of paper with the idea on it and throws them all at Steve Jobs, and he can't catch any of them. And then Steve Jobs goes, okay, yeah, fair point, and then goes from there. So I think there's some method in simplicity as well, like to come back to Marcus Aurelius as well.
I'm a massive fan of that insight and that story. There's some Millward Brown data that very simply illustrates that point. It goes from, I think, one message to five message, and each additional message reduces the overall recall of any message, and it's absolutely brilliant. But I was talking to a colleague of mine last week, and because I work for a competitor of what is now Kantar, what was Millward Brown, and I sent it to my colleague Orlando. Said, we must have a data point that's similar to this, surely, that we can publish, because I really love this, and I help companies make better adverts, and I'm always saying, take the voiceover out, take all those words out, focus on saying one thing and say one thing very well. Anyway, he said to me, he works with the IPA here in the UK, and it's actually, even in the data set he's got, is even more exaggerated. So when you've got one message, if that one message is too bold and too shouty, that also affects its impact. So it's not just the number of messages, but it's the way in which you say it can have a massive impact as well. I'm going to get the data off him, because I think there's something quite interesting in this whole area, because it's very counter our instincts. Because you want to go, well, I want to make sure they understand this ad, so I'm going to put I'm going to make the voiceover, I'm going to put all the words on the screen, I'm going to fit as many scenes as I can, and it ends up becoming just wallpaper. It just becomes something that you just glaze over, and you can't recall at all.
Yeah, there's actually this really funny meme. It's called, I'm just trying to get the name of it. I call it the distribution or standard distribution meme, but I think it's also called the normal distribution meme or mid-wit meme. So MIDWAT meme. And basically, look, I'll send you the link here so you can kind of figure out what it is and see what I'm seeing. But basically, the standard distribution. So you got on one side the sort of novice, which is a very low percentage of companies. You got the majority in the middle, which is the majority of all companies or thinkers. And then at the far end on the right, you've got the minority of thinkers, which is the really, really smart people, right? And it's sort of just drawing, it's a whole series of memes that you can do. And it just draws this analogy that sometimes someone who doesn't know what they're doing or does it for the first time ends up doing it almost as well in the same method than someone who's really, really smart. And all the people in the middle are the ones who overcomplicate things and get into the details.
I tell you what, I love about that, because in my role, I have a bit of a saying, which is, unless I can understand it, we don't launch it. because like I'm the least smart person in the room. I mean, I'm not saying that to be sort of pretend to be humble, but I work with lots of very clever people that have done research for many years, and I don't have their depth of research or their understanding of marketing science, but I do know how to adopt what they're doing and make it simple that everybody can understand it, sort of thing. So I take my role as being the representative of all the 95% of people to the right that need to go and know and understand what they're talking about, you see. So I said, look, you've got to get this past me. If I get it, we're fine.
Well, it's funny because the where it came up on my radar was I think it was a year ago. Someone posted on Twitter. I love some of the people on Twitter. They're so hilarious. It's probably the least filtered of everything. And it can be a bit of a troll on me. But there's this guy who was talking about measurement, and very very experienced guy in the tech world. And you know what tech people are like when they're measuring, a customer acquisition and all those kind of digital channels. You get so much data. You could really get lost in it, and to your detriment as well. So there's this funny one where, at the beginning, this person just goes, oh, look, all KPIs or metrics are just directional anyway. So, use them, but also, they're not going to tell you everything. And then there's the majority of the people where this person kind of angry face. I don't know. I just sent you the image on LinkedIn Messenger if you want to see it. But the people in the middle are just like angry face. No, you must track everything and have MMM models and econometrics and, tagged, UTM tagged everything. And, these fancy weighted MTA models and blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, it's going to be doom and gloom. And then the person who's the really, smart person, the sage, just goes, yeah, look, all KPIs are directional anyway. Just, they're not going to tell you everything. Just go with your gut.
I think it was Tom Roach that says something like all models are wrong, some of them are useful, and that's about right, isn't it? And I mean, I've done the full MMM in my career. I've also done some overnight super fast testing, at the other extreme, and it doesn't get more predictive the more data you go into. It feels like going into a wood that gets thicker and thicker, and you get more and more lost in it. And so, and the other,
So analysis paralysis, right?
it is, and it gets slower. I mean, that's the thing I found is that with an MMM, often it's months and months after the campaign's run. We've seen the effective market. We've seen people vote with their wallets. It's long since kind of the result has happened, and I've rarely really benefited from some of that. It's yeah.
Well, you know what's funny? I think that's a good segue into what you're doing now because you're working for System One, which I've been following for a long time, and that's a lot around pre-testing. If I got that right, yes, a pre-testing of advertising creative before it sort of goes to.
Yeah. No, it's a really cool thing actually. I mean, it's based on, as you'll know, Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. The idea that most of our decisions are made, intuitively rather than rationally, and we tend to retrospectively justify the decision we made. I mean, the great Rory Sutherland, a brilliant man, but he said, if System One is the Oval Office, System Two is the press office. And I think that's quite a clever way of looking at it because, we like to tell people how smart we are and what a sensible decision we've just made, when in fact it's completely irrational. But, I mean, System One's very clever because what we're able to do is basically just measure emotion and the intensity of emotion and the reasons why people feel the way they do about something. And again, far clever people than me, but my colleague Orlando and his labs team have spent 15 years looking at market share data and looking at business effects for as a result of campaigns. And they noticed a very, very strong correlation between the kinds of emotion, the intensity of emotion, and long-term business effects. So we've kind of basically reverse engineered the prediction model based on that. And it's funny because it's your distribution curve you just sent me in LinkedIn. It's a way of doing the 1%. That if you then go into if you then try and build the MMM and the complexity in the middle, you end up reversing back into, wow, we could have saved ourselves some time and just done this, asked this one question.
It's funny. This came up actually in Eliza's episode I just recorded, and she's the same. So she does sentiment tracking using a sample of the whole internet, big data, AI, all that kind of thing. But she's the same thing. It's like it's not about measuring what people are saying. It's the intensity, the motion behind what they're saying that then predicts behavior. So you've got to remove a lot of the explicit signals out there or stated behavioral intent and get through to the emotion, because that ends up being predictive of what they're going to do. So she just predicted the Australian federal election to the seat almost. Like, it was so close. She was like 77 and would end up being 76 or reverse, but she predicted it 6 weeks out, and everyone thought she was crazy, going, no, you're wrong. And she didn't even believe it herself, right? But all the data was showing, and it's just like, well, I got to trust what I'm seeing here. It's
I love your story, because we've done something very, very similar. So our founder Jon, when Trump was running for office in 2016, 10 months out, we predicted Trump. But because what we did is we took the model we use is called fame, feeling, and fluency. So, have you heard of the person? What kind of feeling does the person evoke, and what do how easily does the person come to mind? We call it fluent devices. So it turns out that Donald Trump's hair was more distinctive than any other candidate in totality. It literally was, his hair was the most distinctive asset of the campaign, And it's funny because we laugh quite rightly, but actually our prediction models suggest that being distinctive is actually quite important in an election, right? Because most people aren't reading political Twitter, getting up to date on what's going on. The majority of people are going, who comes to mind quickly? Are they any good? And can I remember them? And that's the model we use. And anyway, so 10 months out, we basically predicted that Trump would edge Hillary Clinton out. Now, at the time, I think the prediction markets had Trump with about a 5% chance of winning. I mean, it was back then, political predictions were landslide Clinton, but 10 months out, we got it right. We did the same for Boris Johnson winning the Tory candidacy. This is obviously 4 years ago now, because he's now out of office. And we also predicted Brexit. Again, Brexit wasn't predicted by the normal opinion polls. So it's system one versus system two. The rational polls were predicting one direction, but if you measure emotion, it actually predicted the other way. And I think, because emotion reveals people's real preferences, not their stated preferences. And, honestly, if you were to ask anybody in 2016 on a survey, would you intend to vote for Trump? You'd have to be fairly bold, to say, yeah, I'm a Trump voter, because it's not, you knew that you were going to risk friendships and, off the back of it. So
same time, right? We're talking about emotions, and this gets, if you're in a board situation, CEO, CFO, or kind of people, COO, you start talking about emotions. They're like, oh, what are you doing? The fluffy marketer, blah 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 blah, right? The usual kind of stereotype. Yet they're just as affected by emotions in their day-to-day life than anything else. How do you get around that stigma of fluffy emotion? It has to move you, and the sometimes ill-fated correlation between sales revenue at the end of that. I mean, is emotion just the sort of start piece to get attention in the memory, but it still then relies on macro forces for the purchase? Like, how close is that to revenue?
Yeah, well, there's lots in there actually. I'll just split that question into two, right? So the mechanics of how it works, and also how you make the case to the board, which I think is where you started, because in terms of how it works, emotion regulates our attention. So if you think about you watching a movie, reading a book, if you start to feel something, you want to keep reading, you want to keep watching, you become more engaged. And the more intense that emotion, broadly, the more glued to the action that you are. So we've actually diagnosed not just the type of emotion that connects to our attention, but the very features in an advert or a movie or a book that actually pique our attention. So one of the things that piques the most attention are pets, right? So very, very, very simple thing. Of course, when you think about it, it makes sense. But if you had a cute dog in your advert, the CEO might go, "What on earth are you doing with this cute dog in an advert?" But actually, if you go to the raw behavioral science of it, we have a strong connection with pets, and it's going to grab your attention. You go, why is this dog in this advert, and so on, and you'll feel a lot of emotion, through that. So we've actually deconstructed advertising to every single feature, whether it's a soundtrack, whether it's words appearing, whether it's a drama and a story, whether it's two people talking, whether it's kind of facial expression, all those things we've deconstructed, and we've correlated those features to to attention, and being able to work out how you capture attention. So the first input is emotion is really important in capturing your attention. The second thing emotion does, which I think you're alluding to as well, is it lodges it in memory, because we remember how we feel we don't remember how we were thinking, right?
Famous quote, isn't it? It's like,
Maya Angelou, is it?
yeah, my Angelou, it's like, it's not about what you say, it's about the feeling in the room after you've left or something. Yeah, 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 yeah.
If you think back to a dramatic childhood experience, it's the feeling that is the thing that's actually stayed with you for a long time, and that's basically what our model shows and predicts is that the ability to use the right emotion, captures attention, and lodges in long-term memory, and that's what makes communication effective over time. In the short term, it's different, by the way, but in the long term, it's a cumulative effect of building those kind of memory structures over time. Now, going back to your first question about the board, and we would say emotion is the most rational thing a marketer can use. And what the reason we say that is because we've proven the business case for emotion. So I was in a really difficult situation in my career a few years ago where I was managing the number one energy drink in the UK called Lucozade, and we also had the highest amount of sugar in our drink, and the UK government obviously didn't approve, and they introduced a sugar tax, and it was quite a draconian sugar tax. It meant we had to take about 2/3 of the amount of sugar out of the energy drink. Now, sugar is quite important to energy drinks, as you might imagine, right? I mean, there's caffeine and there's other things you can put into, but in this case, glucose is a glucose energy drink, so sugar was a key ingredient. We had to reformulate. We did the reformulation, and we ended up suffering a big backlash, huge backlash on social media. We lost, I think, 15-20% of our buyers. It was quite dramatic in terms of one way to shrink a brand. It was well up there.
Sorry, the only thing that changed was the sugar.
Well, yes, that's right. So we had to go from, I mean, the technicality, we had something like 12 grams of sugar per 100 mil. We had to go down to 4.5 to be within the regulations. Now, the only way you can do that is replace that sugar with sweetness, or a sweetener system like aspartame. So we were having to balance off artificial sweeteners with regular glucose. So it's a difficult thing to do, and being able to match the taste. This brand's 80 years old, right? So it's one of those tastes that everybody is familiar with. I mean, maybe like V Energy or something in Australia, and it's got distinct. It's got.
You don't have to tell me. My ex, she was a flavor chemist and still is, and so she's formulating the flavors that goes in the base, and like the minerality of the water even makes a huge difference on the expression of the flavor chemicals. Let alone the acidification and the sugariness. So completely changes everything. So you got to reformulate everything, and it's never the same. It's just impossible.
You've got it. And so, I mean, we put a huge amount of R&D resource and time and effort and research into doing the reformulation, but we could never get a precise match. We got close, and over time, the new flavor has become adopted, but at the time it was a big backlash. Anyway, so the challenge I had was then to relaunch the brand. So I came up with a new positioning, new ad campaign, new sampling, new in-store experience, the whole gamut basically. And I remember that at the time, the CEO at the time said to me, I want you to prove this is going to work before we sign it off, right? And I'm like, mate, we're both marketers. We both know the game here. This is art and science. It's never, like we talked about at the top of the show. No model's perfect here. So I'll find the best one I can. And that's actually when I met System One, because they're able to predict how people would react in reality. But the thing that they do, which I think is unique, is they actually predict your market share. So because we've got so many validations going back over so many years, we're able to see in different categories the market share change as a result of campaigns that have created certain emotion. We weight it for media, by the way, because media obviously has a huge impact, right? So we adjust for media, but media adjusted, we can actually see the creative impact. So what I did there is I went to the board, and I had the whole relaunch and the campaign and the idea and the creative and everything. And I basically said, look, don't take my word for this. This is the emotional response that this campaign is creating. This is the media impact based on our share of voice. And this is what the model predicts will happen in reality. And actually what it predicted, this is why I'm a big fan of System One, actually, what it predicted came to pass. Very, very closely, actually. Now, you and I both know, and I have to, yeah, in a good way. Yes, I should clarify. Yeah. So we'd suffered a decline, and we were trying to recover. And within about 12 months, we'd recovered the market share we'd lost, which is what this prediction had suggested. So that was very, very reassuring. Now, of course, I should, when you say those kind of things, people go, yeah, but what about this? What about price? What about promotion? What about distribution? All those things. Of course, the correlation, I think, in that case was about zero 0.7, right? So it's not perfect. It doesn't explain everything. And it never would. I mean, this is where we have to remember that all models are broken, but some are useful. And that applies here. But the important thing was in marketing, which traditionally is seen as an unaccountable profession. You talk to the factory, they know what they made yesterday, they know the customer service numbers, they know the on time in full delivery to depots, so it is precise. The sales director knows how much did we sell on promotion in Tesco yesterday, at what price did we sell it for. So the other departments on the exec have got very specific KPIs, very measurable, very immediate. As marketing, you're building a brand in the long term. This is sort of the best proxy for an equivalent metric. And it was good enough actually to get a huge amount of support actually from the board, and they approved the biggest investment that the company had ever made. So so it does work in reality.
Well, I think that's a great example because I'm a big fan of like, okay, it's not perfection here. We're just like something is better than nothing. And at least if it's indicative of potentially reducing some major risk errors, then isn't that better than just flying blind or like trusting anecdotal evidence on, what your agency is saying or someone else? Like,
I think that's it. The other thing from experience as well that is that the speed at which you create work is lightning quick, right? So if you're under pressure marketing director, you're making decisions on creative, making decisions on flavors, you're making decisions on packaging, you're making decisions on distribution. You're going so quickly that having an MMM model is a great rear view mirror, but it's absolutely of no use in the moment, you see. And that's where because the system one, can work overnight. It can work, you can do it in about 3 hours if you really had to. And it becomes so useful because in the moment you can make a decision between, do we go with the blue packaging or the red packaging? Like literally, from putting your laptop down one night to the next morning, you'll have the answer. Well, blue got more votes than red, that kind of thing. And it's so useful for that. I tell you what it does is, I would probably have gone on 25 years of instinct and whatever up to that point, right? So, I've seen from trial and error what kind of works in reality, but this gives you the data. And sometimes you're wrong, sometimes your instincts are wrong. And this gives you a really quick data point to guide you in the right direction.
It just reminded me, and I think this is what I really wanted your take on was there's very few people who have done big brand work and then also have gone maybe downstream to something smaller. There is a litany of failures here that I hear all the time where maybe a medium sort of size company or a startup or something has gone, oh, okay, well, we'll get that experienced hire CMO, big brand to come in here because, they're experienced with big brands and blah, blah, blah. And it's going to be really successful. And I've heard that fail so many times. And I just think it's very rare to see people who have done both. I have, but probably more on the small to medium side. And I think perhaps reverse for you. But, it's good because it's completely different environments, completely different politics, budgets, all that kind of stuff. So really interested to get your take. Like you're working with big FMCG brands and then you've sort of gone a bit smaller. What do you see the major differences here in how to be effective in those roles? If you had to top three off the top of your head.
No, I love it. It's probably my favorite subject matter actually because it's extremely different, And sometimes when you're reading marketing Twitter and the academic debates, and you think, have you ever tried to start a brand with no money? Because like you clearly haven't. You would not be saying keep your advertising going in that situation where you're gonna run out of money tomorrow. I've been there. You know what I mean? It's quite hilarious. Anyway, I'll briefly tell you the situation I went in. I think I've made the most extreme jumps between positions. So I did for 4 years actually. I did a management buy-in to a little juice business over here in the UK, and it was a small family-owned business. It had grown up over many years. It had a long history. It was a kind of regional player in the UK, and they'd never ever well, I say done marketing. It's really dangerous to say marketing. You know what I mean? Because we'll get into what is marketing. I know, well, actually, herein lies the answer. Actually, interestingly enough, that they'd never done marketing, quote unquote, and yet they had a lovely little business that's very profitable. Anyway, so yeah, I turned up as a small investor in the company as a supposedly big shot, from a kind of corporate company that knew what he was doing. I mean, my last role actually, I probably oversaw 6-7 million pounds of spend or something like that. Had a team of 50, had brands that you would have heard of, sort of thing. And then I'm in a little juice company. Nobody has heard of the brand. The packaging is very suspicious and very sort of generic. It looks like, it doesn't even look like an own label. It looks kind of a bit worse than own label. It's like you went into do you have cash and carries? Like, kind of cash and carries.
What do you mean? Yeah, yeah. We call them. It's like IGAs or it's like independent grocers kind of thing, and they have these like weird brands that you've never seen before, and yeah.
Yeah, it's like the independent store where you go in and go, I've never seen that before. It's kind of like mimicking the famous brand. It was like that basically. Now, as the sort of first marketing person they'd had in their history, I had to start from nothing. I mean, no budget, no nothing. I mean, it was funny. I mean, I was the Twitter handle, I was the Instagram, I was the Facebook. I actually designed and put up the logo above the entrance on, I literally designed our company logo and put it on the office. I would be in the factory deciding what flavor went down the production line the next day. I'd be checking the labels in the warehouse to make sure that they weren't falling off. I mean, that's the sort of thing I was doing, right? Now, marketing, quote unquote, here again, was probably no more than 10% of my job, but most of my job, if you take the broader definition of marketing, do we have a good quality juice? Is the packaging going to be good? Do we have a distribution deal with a major retailer? Can we get on the shelf? Are our logistics working? It was things like that really, that actually made the difference. Because if if you're not on the shelf, you're not being sold. So I guess when you work in a small business, it's the real fundamentals of marketing. Are you what are your debtor days like? You're getting enough cash, to continue, sort of thing. They were very real things. When the production line broke down, your brand was over. Unless you could get it back up again. So it's very, very, very different, I have to say. But what I think the thing that what I discovered there is my most creative work ever was done during those 4 years, by far. Because what happens is when you have a budget, what you do psychologically is you go, what did we do with this budget last year? And you tend to, it's a bit like a path dependence. I noticed it because I went from there to the number one energy drink, the number one fruit drink, and much bigger business, huge resources, huge teams, very professionally run. So I went from literally one extreme to the other. When in that scenario, you tend to go, well, each brand's got 10 million pounds to spend. So they go, right, I'll do some TV, I'll do some radio, I'll do some in-store, I'll do some social, right?
You start allocating like a fund manager would at like a financial firm. You just say, oh, this bucket, bucket, bucket. Okay, yeah, let's go.
Yeah, you spread your risks, don't you? And each department, you've created departments to manage those things whose livelihood depends on it. So you're sitting there looking at the sort of 20 strong social team, and you're thinking, well, if I cut social this year, you lot are out of jobs. You know what I mean? So what? So it tends to make you do what you've always done, because the whole machinery, it feels too big a job to start from scratch and go, well, what should we be doing? If you started this over again, what would you do? So it becomes quite hard to create change. Now, this is why small brands exist, of course, because small brands can move like, speedboats rather than tankers. But going back to the creativity point, what I noticed is the advantage in a small business when you have no resources is, the question I had to ask myself is, how can my packaging become a media campaign? So one of the things that I was really proud of is that the brand was called Juice Burst, right? So a very simple idea. And before, the packaging was just like it literally was, if you Googled fruit and you took the most normal looking box of fruit picture, that's what it was, right? It was literally like this fruit box, Juice Burst, and it was written in Times New Roman before. It was like the most like textbooky sort of thing. Anyway, so I worked with this amazing design agency, and I said, look, create me something that's going to be talked about, that's going to like, effectively every buyer in the country is going to want a part of. And really simple idea. The idea we came up with was, let's explode the fruit because it's called juice burst. Let's exaggerate flavor and what we did is we actually invented, and this is going to sound crazy, we had a 4-day production, right, where we got a phantom camera. Phantom camera is like a Hollywood grade, it was the camera that was used on the Matrix to do all the slow-mo, right? So we got a Hollywood grade camera, and then we blew fruit up, right, and we filmed the fruit being literally exploding in slow motion. It was the most dramatic thing ever, right? But we had to invent the world's smallest known charge, because when we started blowing up raspberries and blueberries, the electrical charge was just like boom, and then like completely like smashed to smithereens. So we actually this guy had to divide the charge into 1/32. So I'm not quite sure whether that's the way you say it, but anyway, he had to design a way of making the charge so tiny that when you exploded the blueberry, it still kept parts of it together, and it looked beautiful when we filmed it. So it was one of
Yeah. Rather than just like sort of disappearing into dust.
it just exactly, it's smithereens kind of thing, that sort of thing. Anyway, why do I tell you sort of a fun story of blowing fruit up in East London, on a Friday? Well, the reason is I discovered this new technology at the time, augmented reality, and there was a company called Blipper who were the pioneers of it. They were based in, Blipper, yeah, they were based in London. And so I met the team at Blipper, and they hadn't yet quite got their proof of concept going. And I said to them, I tell you what, I can't afford to pay you a single penny. I have no money at all. What I might have, though, is a case study for you to go and show all the other big companies around the world what's the potential of this. So I said, look, will you do this for me? Right? I'm going to go and film fruit exploding. Could you use your AI so that when someone puts their phone in front of a pack, the fruit goes from being a whole fruit to exploding in front of your eyes, kind of thing like this? I said, that would be so frigging cool. So anyway, I worked with them. So we designed the label in the factory. We blew fruit up, we filmed it. I gave it to Blipper. Blipper worked literally, I mean, I'm not kidding here, as the product was going down the production line for the very first time, because we had a new bottle design and we new investment in the production, right? They were literally coding as it went down to line, and as the juice was going to stores, I was going, have you cracked it yet? Have you got the code? Have you managed to do this yet? Because what I'd done, which no one else had done before, is I'd actually put instructions on the pack as to how to use the augmented reality, because no one knew how to do AR. I mean, AR that was just a thing you read about in science books. It wasn't something that anyone had kind of figured out. So anyway, so I did that. But then what I did is my business card was blippable. So in my business card, when you put your phone over my business card, a hologram of me popped out the card and gave a little speech. And every salesperson in the company had their own hologram. Now, the genius with that is, so when I went to customer meetings, and I did not use PowerPoint, so let's say I'm meeting you, right? And you're in charge of Tesco. I would go and say, I'd love to give you my business card. So, which is a very obviously mundane thing to do. But I say, just indulge me for 1 second. Just put your phone over the business card. They put their phone over and they go, whoa, what's going on? And then I'd pop up and go, hey, it's Jon here from Juice Burst. We've got the world's leading juice brand. And I'll go into a little speech about it, sort of thing. But I had their attention. We're going back to emotion, right? But I had their attention for the entire meeting, and they remembered that interaction. And in fact, my business card in the first 6 months was blipped, was the phrase, was blipped 30,000 times in 6 months. The packaging was blipped 300,000 times. Now, bear in mind, I have no marketing budget. There is no way I could have had a Facebook campaign or a Twitter campaign or anything else that would remotely mirror what I achieved by kind of taking an emergent technology, doing something very surprising that was also really connected with my brand positioning. So, I mean, I did, there were probably 3 or 4 things like that I did in my time there that didn't use any budget. We were just insanely, kind of successful. But the other lesson is as well, if you have no money, you have to be creative. But the second thing is you are never just creative for creative sake. You are creative commercially, because I had to think, how does everything I do lead to a sale, either now or in the future? So what I would do is, like the business card or like the packaging, my first priority was not actually my consumer audience. My first priority was, how do the 50 buyers of juice in the UK get to hear about what I'm doing? So, I made sure that, I had sort of, packages sent to all of them and instructions of how to do it. And, I made sure that the people that made decisions about which juice was stocked in fridges in the UK, though they were my real audience, because if they said yes, then the money would follow, and I'd end up having, I'd end up having a marketing budget in the future. So, it's commercial creativity is really the key.
Reminds me of this tweet. Sorry, there's this guy called Jake Sanders in America. POS Marketers, his handle on Twitter. Anyway, I remember, and this is how we first this is how we first connected. And he's got this funny tweet. And it says, flight attendant says, "Is there a marketer on the plane?" Question mark. And then he's got me. Depends. What's the budget? I think that's really true in this kind of just wrapping what this is, because this happens to me all the time. And like, there is, I think, truth in that in terms of, well, what can I do with nothing? And like, I've been there as well. Went to work for many startups, bootstrapping, whatever. They sell you the promise and then you get in their role and they're like, well, we don't have any money. And once you get over that sort of like, well, what do I do? You start thinking, like, this is an inversion technique, like classic, right? Is that you take away the one thing that you're fixated on, and then it actually opens up all these other doors. And then you go, and this is why I think, and maybe you have experience with this as well. Like, you come back to the product offering and product experience is like the main driver, and then distribution of that product experience. And I think, when you've only worked in marcoms or advertising, especially, you're only exposed to, the advertising side of things or the communication side of things. And you don't get exposure to those core drivers of growth, which are step change drivers of growth from what I've seen and experienced. And it was just funny, like working in tech, it's all product, it's all distribution in a adoption sort of, collaborative partnershipy sort of way, not on shelves, but being resold or packaged up with other things and co-promotions and that kind of thing. And that's where I got really creative. And I just had to, but I think it's a confronting thing for people who have only worked in marcoms or advertising to admit. And there's a lot of natural pushback I've felt. I mean, have you experienced the same thing, or?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think the other interesting dimension to that is, in a small business, marketing, quote unquote, it is everything, right? So I was the Twitter handle and the advertising manager, whatever. So, and the and the flavorist and the dot dot dot, like pretty much job title, add it here, I was it, for about 5 minutes per day, But the other thing, just touching on the first part of your question, was the beauty of that is, if there was something wrong with the product, I would know. And if there was an opportunity to create a new flavor to appeal to a new target audience, I would know, because I was with our customers, I was with our consumers, I was getting the feedback on social, I was interacting with people that had won competitions or whatever, So in a way, you have this wonderful ecosystem of feedback that comes in, but it's holistic feedback. And I think with the performance marketing thing is, you only see in part, and that's the danger, is that you're seeing a particular bit of the funnel. You're not seeing the product experience necessarily, or you're not seeing how people feel about the brand over here. So you're unable to see the big picture. The lovely thing in a small company is it's easy to see the big picture, and that's great, because you can make a decision, you can move quickly and solve it. You can go, well, hang on a minute, we've discovered that the real flavor trend is over here, so let's invent it, right? Let's just quickly make something tomorrow that will fit that, go and sell it. If it works, great, we'll do some more of it. If it doesn't, we'll go to the next one. And that agility and connectivity of data and insight and feedback loop is so cool. I mean, it's why it's what you can learn as a marketer. You can respect all the different data points and the different source of information.
I think you touched on a comment that you made on something that I posted as well, which is really interesting. And my argument is around this budgeting thing, right? Because we're always talking about budget. There's always a constraint budget. I mean, to pretend there's an unlimited budget is fanciful. The realities of business is that you always got these trade-offs going. Well, we could do that, but then we can't do that, and so on and so forth. So, I always say it's really funny how budget allocations are generally made in a proportional basis of revenue. So they're allocated proportionally from last year's revenue and then projected into new year. And then I think the danger is when perhaps other people expect disproportional results from a proportional budget. And I'm like, the reality of that is that that's generally not logical. So they're like, okay, take this proportional budget and then grow us by 5% market share above and beyond all our competitors. Now, if all the other competitors are doing the same budgeting method, which they generally do, then you're all just proportionally in sync with each other. So to get way beyond that requires way more revenue in proportion to what would usually be the case. So, and this is what you said. Incremental budgeting tends to produce the same results as the previous year and encourages the team to use the same tactics and the same scale, leading to the same outcome. And it kills creativity. And I just found that really interesting. I mean, do you have any sort of anecdotal evidence or like some stories you can tell about, being constrained by just a budget figure?
Firstly, just a big plug for a book actually on this exact topic. Adam Morgan, who originally wrote Eat the Big Fish, sort of seminal book about 20 years ago, innovation. In fact, Eat Big Fish is his consultancy. He wrote a book 3 or 4 years ago called A Beautiful Constraint, and it looks at how constraints are basically the mother of invention, and actually applying a constraint to yourself. He calls it I think, is it a compelling constraint or a propelling question? I can't remember. The phrase he uses is basically that by putting a constraint on yourself, quite an extreme constraint, is actually the best way to generate the kind of ideas that might transform your business. So weirdly, I think the answer to your question is, because you're right, that all things being equal and everyone doing the same thing, if you spend in line with your share, you will maintain your position, right? So that's what the marketing science will suggest. So if your campaigns are average, if your where you spend your money is average, then of course, right, it's going to be the same, isn't it? So weirdly, I think that the actual answer is to go, let's zero budget and say, right, you now have nothing. What would you do now? Genuinely, what would you do? Now, the problem with this question is I've been there in big companies, and everyone knows that actually we do have the budget, don't we? So no one ever really embraces that question in the way they should. If you could do, though, you might come up with the kind of ideas that do genuinely transform your business for the kind of modest budgets you might have. But if you start with the budget at the market standard level, then what happens is I'll tell you what. So I think what I was referring to in that tweet was when I worked at LucasAid from Ibina. So the sort of thing the teams would say to me is, well, we did out of home last year, or we did a radio campaign last year, or we can't afford to do TV, or we have a 3-year sponsorship program. So they didn't think, what's the business objective? What's the brand goal? How could I put all my resources behind answering the single question? They started from a point of view of what did we do before? And I just think that's such a flawed way of thinking, because of course you're going to get the same results that you always have done. So I think it takes bravery, and I think this is where organizational design doesn't help marketers, because you have your media contracts, you have your incumbent agency, you have your in-house social media team, you have your production department, you have your brand managers. They're divided by, I'm the on-the-go brand manager, I'm the take-home brand manager for my portfolio. So what happens is you've designed this organization to enforce the status quo and basically keep your brand at exactly the same market share. Because what we know is, of course, if you want to change the future, you have to change the inputs to your marketing and pull some different levers. But how do you pull the different levers when it means you might have to reorganize your department, cut loose some agencies, employ some new ones, do something differently? So I've seen that path dependency is deeply ingrained in organizations.
Catch 22, isn't it? It's like we're just talking about like having no budget and then making sure you have a proportional budget or disproportional budget if you have audacious goals. So it's kind of like kind of said the opposite. But I mean, I think it's being realistic about where you are in the market and what you need to get to achieve that objective. And I think maybe there's some mix match here, and it brings me to the next thing I want to ask you about, this expectation gap between getting growth is really easy in marketing, just do a 15-second TVC or radio spot and blah blah blah, and then that's used to what happened. Like, it was a very concentrated, unfragmented media market, and now you've got hundreds of channels out there and different things, and your market is completely fragmented. It's like way more complex than it used to be. So really simple question. Why does everybody?
I detect this isn't a simple question, by the way.
No, it's not. Why does everyone hate marketers?
Oh wow. Oh, that's a fabulous question. Well, I think geez. I think there's so much in that. Right. Well, I think firstly, everyone thinks they're a marketer, right? So it's unlike no one goes to the boardroom and goes, "I think I'm an engineer." I'm not going to go like have a point of view on the production line we've just built and whether we should have ordered a different brand of filler or whatever. I don't go and assume that. I don't try and take on the finance director with his accounting methodology and go, "Well, I use this particular accounting methodology rather than that methodology when I'm adding up." Um, so the first thing is just that firstly, everyone thinks they're a marketer. They've all got a point of view on what you do, right? So I think that's the first thing, which makes it deeply irritating, because you can find yourself in a real debate about tactics in what is supposed to be a strategic meeting. You know what I mean? Why are we arguing about the font size? That kind of stuff.
And then everyone's friend or like a niece can post on social. So, why aren't we doing that thing? I'm like, well, she's selling cakes that everybody likes to eat. We're selling a complex B2B product. Like, what are you talking about?
Well, I'm sure in many a boardroom, you've got some sort of 60-year-old guy who's going, according to my daughter, we should be on TikTok. It's just and that strategy. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, all right. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is I think that marketing is imprecise as a science. So I think naturally. What happens is because you haven't got the same facts and figures and the same measurability and same certainty you have in other functions, it necessarily means it's open to interpretation. And so you kind of get different philosophies. Now of course you look at performance marketing versus brand building. Both are true, right? I mean, in most cases both are telling you something you need to know, and neither are perfect, and both have flaws and all the rest of it. And it's hard to hold that nuance in your head, sort of thing, for a lot of marketers. They tend to go, the future's just that, or the future's just this. And then I think the third thing is there are so many charlatans out there doing pseudo marketing that's what everyone's read. Do you know what I mean? So people haven't look, let's be honest, right? Most people have not read the long and the short of it. But most people will have read what Gary Vee had for breakfast, right? So this is the problem: is that we're all the most people who are not in our profession are exposed to the kind of people that don't reflect what we do. So as sort of most people think that all that in previous jobs, I'm saying most people think all I do is the colouring in. They have this idea that I'm just there literally designing a poster. Because that's their perception of marketing is so. So I think that's a big part of it, is that what most people think marketing is not actually what marketing is. And people will be surprised actually at how the advice I always give to people when they're starting out in marketing is really understand finance. Because actually, I know it sounds a bit weird, but actually what you should be doing is having the biggest impact on the future returns that your company will make, right? You are instrumental building the strategy, creating the innovation, delivering tactics that will deliver growth, right? No other function has got a bigger impact on the future profitability of your organization than you as a marketer, right? Most marketers can't add up, and that's a problem, you see. So we need to make sure that marketers are given the tools to because they've got a big in lots of companies the A&P line is the biggest line in the P&L. Sometimes it's bigger than overheads. So it's amazing, the responsibility, and you've often got a 23-year-old making the decision. So anyway, it's a long answer to a short question, but I think all those factors collude together to create this kind of nobody's right. So
I have this theory about the lower the barriers to entry on something, so the easier it is to do something, the less appreciated the craft is to do it well. So especially because everyone can just post on social media. They're like, I'm a marketer. I'm like, no, you're posting on social media.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what? I have got Mark Ritson screaming in my ear virtually now, going, training. No one's been trained, and he's got a point. I mean, I started out in finance, which I'm very grateful for actually, because I feel like it's a superpower in marketing. It's like, oh, I understand a P&L. I'm thinking about the financial returns this business is going to get. So, I started out in finance and really proud of that. But I had to make this really big jump into marketing. Now, rightly or wrongly, at no point did I think I should go and get a marketing qualification. I didn't go, do you know what I need? I need to go and spend 3 years at marketing school or do an MBA. I never remotely thought about it. All I thought about was, how can I scoop up as much experience as I possibly can? And now, ironically, actually, weirdly doing this podcast, actually now, I've learned so much more of the theory of marketing, which is making me a better marketer now. No doubt about it. Now, what I love at the moment is I've got the practical experience. I've got the scars that I can tell you precisely how it goes right and how it goes wrong. But I've also got the theory and understanding of theory in the way that I've had. So I wish I could flip that, and I wish in my 20s I'd started out, taking the time out, really understanding it. I don't, but also look, I don't think. I mean, the mini MBA Mark does is amazing. That didn't exist. Nothing like that existed when I was starting out. I mean, I think there was what's the British? There is a marketing thing, but it's sort of like it's like an undergraduate course that people do. I forgot what it's called now. But I mean, as a graduate, it would feel like going back to school rather than, it wasn't MBA. It wasn't like a trade up from a degree. It was like a trade down. I can't remember what it's called now. But anyway, that was the only one that was available.
Yeah, because a lot of those courses, like, and again, I think you've got to do the right course. So it can give you very general sort of guidance. But then I find when the rubber hits the road, and you actually have to do something. They're not always useful. Like, I look back because I was classically trained in this, but at the same time, I've then gone into organizations like startups, and they're A/B testing, some sort of piece of copy on the, a landing page or something, very tactical, and they're spending a lot of time on it. And the product team, it's like a team of 10 or 20, 50 people on this thing, and I'm like, you could do that A/B test and find out the answer, or you could read one chapter of this book, which would give you the macro guidance and tell you that what you're going to find out in a month is. And so you could save yourself a whole month of opportunity cost and 15 people's time. And I'm like, well, yeah. So there's this whole data-driven kind of people that are proving things and testing things that have already been proven. Yeah. What are you doing?
I know it's true, and look, we live in a very fortunate age where we have the internet and we have things called books, right? I know it sounds crazy, but I'm constantly shocked at how badly read most marketers are, and it's not hard to understand. I mean, as I said before, I'm a simple guy. I understand most of what I read, and it makes a lot of sense. It's not perfect, but it makes a lot of sense and it's useful. And I just think, like, marketers could do. I mean, there are probably 10 really important marketing textbooks out there. It wouldn't take anyone long, even if you don't do a mini MBA. You could read 10 textbooks, and they're not that hard to read. That would tell you most of what you need to know. And if you get stuck, a search on the internet is going to provide some answers. So it's partly why I did the podcast, actually, because
I want to talk about the podcast. So thanks for mentioning it, because I love your podcast as well. So congrats on that. I think it's going really well. It's really interesting. Love the guests you're having on it. Obviously, we're talking on mine as well. But we were talking a bit about like the dynamics of podcasts as a channel and like things that we've learned. And I've learned that I've had to ask dumb questions that I already know the answer to in an interview, which is kind of weird, right? But it's that sort of Dunning-Kruger effect. If you don't, you get bad answers. So on that note, I was listening to this Joe Rogan episode, which, regardless of whether you like Joe Rogan or not, doesn't matter. He was on Lex Fridman's podcast, and I'm a big fan of Lex Fridman. He goes down a bit of a rabbit hole, but anyway, Joe made this really interesting point on this most recent one. I think it was last month or something, where he says podcasting is like the most pure form of media there is, because there is no filter. There's no one. Anyone can do it. The barriers to entry is so low. There's no cost or anything. So you can kind of just say what you want without being beholden to anyone else's agenda or whatever. And I found that really interesting. And coming back to you, what's your experience with this medium, and what have you learned out of it, and what are the advantages?
Those. I love it. I mean, first, I'll tell you a really, really little story about how I came up with the name, because it talks exactly to your point there. So I just been fired twice actually in one year. I had a really bad year about 3 or 4 years ago. I got It was a bad year. It was a bad year. I got fired twice. I found myself freelancing, and I never freelanced before, and it was really interesting actually, and I got to do some fun stuff. Anyway, I ended up being invited by System One to Cannes to be on their panel talking about a client side perspective on creativity. Really, really cool. Love it. And CNBC were out hunting for CMOs to interview for their program, and somebody had introduced James from CNBC to me and said, "Oh, you know, he's just left a CMO role. He might be up for talking to you." Anyway, so James is like, "What do you think of this?" And I just go on about, well, I'd say the one person who's not here is the customer. Right, we're celebrating creativity. The people that are important are not represented on this beach. They're paying for all this, and if we
It reminds me of every marketing committee. I'm like, everyone asks me for my opinion. What do you think of this ad? I'm like, my opinion is regardless. What do your customers think of the bloody ad? Like, what are we talking about?
so exactly. So I had this little rant about the one person not here is the customer, and if we keep ignoring the customer, eventually they'll go away. We won't make any money. We won't be coming back having rosé, and I'd like to keep coming back having rosé, which is ironic actually because I have won Cannes Lions as a client. I've never been invited, so this is just revenge. This is just me kind of being upset. So if any of my previous agencies are listening, this is why, friends. This is why I'm doing this. Anyway, but it was the comment he said off camera because he stopped the camera and he said, "Blimey," he said, "you're the first uncensored CMO I've met this week." And I thought, "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, I know what you're talking about because basically any CMO in a big job, you see, I used to have big jobs, don't now, but any CMO in a big job has a PR department, has a press officer. I was like this. I would be told what to say, and I'd be given a script, and I'd have to stick to that script because it was company. You know, I was representing the company, and I understand why. And I was taught how to do media interviews and how to manipulate the question and how to never answer the question and things like that. You know, which actually I found it like a game. It was like, how good can I get at like bridging from what you asked me to what I wanted to say all along? You know, it was quite cool. But it created a thought in my mind. I said, yes, like you really don't hear much. You really don't hear CMOs talking about their jobs or what it's really like to do those kind of roles. And you don't really get people talking honestly about some of the conversations we've just had. And there are so many marketers out there that don't have access to what marketing really is and how you really do the job and what information is really out there. Do you know what I mean? It's really hard to find. So I just thought, damn it, that's a good name for a podcast. I'll call it the Uncensored CMO. And all I'll do is just go and meet people who have got something interesting. The two criteria was either they have the evidence and they have the theory and they've got the science, right? So I'll bring wisdom or I'll bring experience, right? So those are basically in my head. I'm thinking, am I going to get a real experience here, or am I going to get somebody that's got the data and wisdom? So that was it, really. That was the objective. And
I think maybe that's why we connect because, like, I'm doing the same thing. Like, I would say 80% of the people I have on my podcast have never been interviewed before. So there's a bit of training there, but you get a really raw a take on what's going on. So I'm sort of like uncovering, the Netflix sort of long tail strategy. So I'm going to people who are like on the front lines, actually doing the work they're talking about, and their perspective is so different to some of the people on the speaking circuits and that kind of thing. I'm not saying that all people on speaking circuits are like that, or don't know what they're talking about, but there's a lot of people who are just have their personal brand and they don't actually do the thing they're talking about.
yes, you're right. Yeah, and it's less polished. But also with the speaking circuit people, you can read their book, you can watch their YouTube. It's rare that you would get anything beyond what's already out there, sort of thing. So I like your strategy because it's a bit like me. It's uncovering the truth of marketing. Let's lift the lid on this. Let's not talk about the polish. Let's talk about what's underneath. And I think that's really powerful. But going back to your Joe Rogan point, I have come to love this medium because it is totally authentic and it's totally real. And look, if you're going to, I mean, the thing that still blows my mind is people are willing to spend up to 90 minutes listening to me have a conversation with someone. I still can't quite understand that, but actually, as a podcast listener myself, I trust it so much more than I trust the mainstream media. You know what I mean? Because I know that most stories in the media, and this is marketing media and normal media, right? But so much of what you read is planted. I mean, I did an exercise years ago with a PR agency who just got the Sunday Times out, put it on the table, and she said, "I want you to add up the number of stories in here that have not been placed by a company for a purpose," right? And it was fascinating because actually, the vast majority, it was something like 75 or 80%, the vast majority of what you read has been placed. You know, it's outrageous. But
The people don't understand. People have never been in this field. They think, oh, the media. Oh, we've got this press release, and our product's awesome, and we'll just send it to a journalist, and they're going to publish an article for us, and we'll get all this publicity. And I'm like, do you have any idea how many requests they get every day from like hundreds of people? They publish like point something percent of all the requests they get. I'm like, are you delusional? But everyone thinks the opposite, like that these publicists are just there with waiting arms.
the world is just waiting to receive my message. They're just on tenterhooks waiting to hear from me. Yeah.
Like the thing they get to publish is generally not always the relationship, but number one is it newsworthy. Like that's kind of primarily what they care about. But also, like, there's a lot of other deals that go on. Like, there's an advertising deal, and maybe off the back end, you might get
Oh, totally.
publicity deal. It's all this like quid pro quo going on behind the scenes that I think people like don't understand how it works. But I just sent you something because it's really interesting. You did touch on this about long and the short. Peter Fielden and Bennett's work as well on the long term sort of non-linear effect of brand and how it affects things, because we were talking about a small organization versus a large one, right? And I think when you're at a small one, you're not privy to the brand effects that you get at a big one. So we all know with some of these EBI laws about basically it sucks to work for a small brand, right? Everything is harder. You have smaller budgets, smaller brand effects. And like no one wants to write about you because what are they getting out of it if they're a publicist? Like, why would I write about some brand that nobody cares? But if it's a big brand, you could associate with that, so there's capital in that. So I just find it a really interesting thing to talk about how sometimes there's this huge lag, nonlinear effect of some of the work that you do at a smaller brand at an early stage, and then that's sort of being realized a lot later down the track. And you made a very interesting comment on that. But anecdotally and maybe from your real experience, I mean, how have you seen that play out through your career?
Totally. 100%. So look, you've got the Ehrenberg Bass theory on it, which is really sound. So small brands get a less. No, I need to get this right, but basically the effect of building mental availability is less for small brands, partly because they've got less physical availability. So in really simple terms, if I'm going to do a nationwide advertising campaign and I have 10% distribution, the opportunity to convert those people who I've built mental availability for is 1 in 10. If I'm the national brand in 100% availability, I've got 10 times the opportunity to convert. So there's a really basic bit of maths. And if you go to Burnett and Field as well and look at their ESOV model, the theory being that if I spend 10% excess share of voice, that translates into 0.5% market share, right? Lovely model. What they have though, and what they show is that the curve is kind of quite bendy, because if you're a small brand, that excess share of voice has to be way higher, partly because you're not physically available as many times. So you'd have to spend ridiculous amounts of money to try and create the same effect as a mature brand would have to spend. The other thing, and this is also, sorry, I'm bouncing around, but if you also look at when brands grow dark, another bit of Ehrenberg Bass work, you also see this play out, that big brands have got an advantage because they've got more legacy mental availability. So they don't have to spend as much to have the same effect on their brand as a small brand would have to do. And also, so when they stop advertising, either big or small brand, you'll see the impact on the small brand way quicker than the impact on the big brand. So all of that means that if you're a small brand, you've basically got a choice, really. You have to have an incredibly generous benefactor with lots of money that is basically going to give you a free pass for 5 or 10 years. I mean, you see this with VCs, don't you, that make huge investments in future technology. And you have to basically accept that there'll be enormous waste, right? That's one option. But your other option is what most challenger brands do, which is how can I create mental availability through using different tactics? So Tony's Chocolonely is a great one. Did you see the Tony's Chocolonely argument on Marketing Week about this is a classic marketing quote unquote. So Tony's Chocolonely have been wildly successful and they've done no marketing. It's ridiculous. I know it was very annoying, and I think I probably said what everyone else said on the thing, which is,
it triggered like everybody, and I think that the headline did its job. Put it that way.
It was like that hot button, wasn't it? It's like Marketing Week said brands successful without marketing. Like what?
Gary Vee says you don't need to be trained marketers. Everyone's like, oh.
Yeah. Oh, anyway, so there are probably like a few hot buttons things out there. They just press that one. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't know. I think Russell might have been on holiday that week or something, so we'll forgive him. But yeah, anyway, it was quite funny. But what Tony's Chocolonely have done brilliantly is created mental availability through using other tactics other than mainstream media, which is what they were referring to, I think, in the article. What they've done amazingly well is create a product that is so distinctive, people talk about it, or they do a PR stunt that basically means people are reading about it on LinkedIn, as you and I were, right? I was the very fact we are reading this is building mental availability. They have not paid. They have paid something. They haven't not paid because they employed someone to do it.
I can't even get this bloody chocolate bar. It's not even available here yet. I want to try it just to see what everyone's talking about. I'm like, what is this bar?
Well, I know. I had the UK country manager on the pod actually earlier in the year. It's a brilliant story. It is one of the world's. It's a bit like Patagonia. It's a very authentic brand. The backstory is very powerful, and they've been enormously successful. But they're building amazing amounts of mental availability. They did what was it? They did an advent calendar in the UK. This is what really took off in the UK. They did an advent calendar where behind one of the doors there was no chocolate, and they did it as a making a point about not everybody in the supply chain is getting fairly rewarded, and for some people they won't get they won't get anything this Christmas. I mean, it was brilliantly executed, but of course you had screaming kids up and down the UK getting very upset because they didn't understand that, and it wasn't communicated particularly well, so that they just went, oh, there's been a product mistake, right? So the team at Tony's got inundated with complaints, and that ended up, it was on the news. It was like #2 read article on the BBC that day or something. Can you imagine any brands that like
Was that unintentional though? I mean, come on, like it's kind of like,
well, there you go. There you go. Exactly. Well, this is what you do. No, no, no. Well, no, no. You're not skeptical. You're correct, because if you are the underdog, you need to do things like this. You need to create publicity, because your other option is having to spend 2 or 3 times a bigger competitor in your category is spending, which is insane. The economics don't work. If you're 10% market share and your competitor's 50, and you have to spend twice what they have to spend just to grow at the same rate, that's not going to work, right? So this is why, of course, Byron and Mark and everyone else would go, big brands have unfair advantages. They do. But what it means is, going back to my creativity point, is that's why small brands have to be much more creative, use their constraints, find other ways of creating mentability, and also they can take a risk and use agility. And so that Tony's calendar would not have been signed off by Cadbury, right? Cadbury would not have signed that off. So they have an ability to do something that we talk about in a way that Cadbury, we won't be talking about Cadbury's doing a calendar next year without a chocolate in it. So that's what I love about challenger brands, is that they change the conversation.
I think that's a good point then, because coming back to big and small brand, like what learnings can you take from that and then apply it to do better work at a big brand? Say you were Cadbury's and you saw the work they're doing, and maybe there's an appetite for maybe a new approach, and you're a CMO, maybe yourself, who's had this really wide experience. I mean, how would you take that and apply it in a large brand organization?
I love it. I mean, it's the possibilities are insane, because if you think about it, right? So what small brands do brilliantly is they're very clear on their purpose and their positioning. They're ultra laser sharp on it. They have to be, right? Because, well, it is. I know, because yeah, I've invented this new champagne because ... right? Whereas if you're the world leading champagne, you're there because, well, someone before me, before that, and before them came up with it. Do you know what I mean? So so you have to be laser focused. So I think the challenge is basically, to any big brand, why are you here? What are you on earth to do? What's your purpose? What's your positioning? So I think you can learn that from a small brand, be razor sharp on it. The second question we've been talking about actually is, so you have an abundance of resource. How do you leverage that resource, and not leverage it to do what you did last year? Leverage it to, I mean, you end up having some weird conversations. I remember on Lucozade, we had, I don't know, I'll probably get sued if I quote the amounts of money, so I won't. But we had a lot, and one of the questions I said is, we're having this meeting about what to do about this relaunch. And I said, hang on a second, we've got enough budget to personally deliver a free bottle with a handwritten letter to everyone in the country, right? Like almost like the milkman used to go down and drop it outside people's doors. I'm not necessarily suggesting we do that, but let's hold the thought a minute. We could actually do something that no startup could dream of doing with the resources we have. And genuinely, I think big brands fail to understand the power of the resources at their disposal. I mean, another linked point actually, which again uncovered at Lucozade and Ribena, because the two main brands there, particularly on Ribena actually, is that most people have worked on the brand for 5 minutes, right? In fact, when I joined, I had an induction with the Lucozade team, and I worked out I had more years of experience than the entire team added together, right? Because most of them were on a graduate scheme. Most of them were sort of 18 months, 2 years, maybe 3 years. The head of marketing, who was amazing, right, one of the best people I've ever worked with, was probably only 7 or 8 years into his career. So most people have got in big companies just don't have that appreciation for the legacy of the brand, the history, distinctive assets, and there is so much in the back catalogue of big brands that you can leverage and use. So I think go back and work out what exists, what people don't understand what they've got to play with, in a big company. Because boy, if you're a small brand, no one's ever heard of you. You've got no history, no legacy, no founder, no sort of 100 years of existence, right? You are a massive disadvantage. But the big company doesn't even realize the advantage they have. So I think understanding your advantage and then acting like the small guy. And I think if you could take the big resources and advantage of a big company, but act as if you were the small company, I mean, what you could achieve would be phenomenal,
I've been doing this with startups as well. So I do a lot of work in tech, right? And the same thing, the price of some of these digital mediums have gone up so much, and the effectiveness has gone down. Like especially Facebook and Google to main two particular channels. Is that when I started calculating the CAC, or the customer acquisition cost, right? It was actually really high using these mediums. I'm like, literally, I've done the sums. I'm like, we could send a direct mail piece to everybody. I could get a list. I could rent a list. I could get a whole list for like not much money, like under a couple of thousand, and then I could send a sample of something, up to $10 to every single person in our TAM, or so a total addressable market, for the same price. And obviously, it's going to get 100% attention, or very close to 100%, because someone's going to open this thing up, and then I'm going to get a richer experience, right? And then I know a proportion of those with mathematical ratios is going to convert into a customer just by playing raw math. And I'm like, why haven't we done that? And then I talked to the people, and then it never occurred to them. I'm like, what is direct mail? Well, I wouldn't know how to execute that. All I know is Google ads and Facebook ads. And I'm like, well, you don't. And then these are the people calling themselves marketers. Like, you're not a marketer, sorry. You're a digital channels expert.
Yeah, I mean, they say there's nothing new under the sun, but I wonder whether there's going to be a reinvention of some of these things. I mean, certainly, like the interesting thing about direct to consumer is you end up basically reinventing the milkman. You end up reinventing an electric vehicle that every morning drops off. Yeah, it drops off something by your front door, and you just go like, that's Amazon, right? It's like.
This is even worse. Okay, Netflix are now starting to do advertising. Okay, now imagine. Now I might post this just in jest and just see what happens. But like, let's just imagine Netflix, like in a couple of months, announces that there is some sort of like playlist or channel that they have where there's short little excerpts from like all the catalogs grouped into a certain theme, and then ads in between that. And I'm like, is that too far a stretch to think that that would be possible? No. And I'm like, essentially, that is TV. So we've come full circle back to TV.
No, totally. Yeah, I know. I think you're absolutely right. And I think, when digital platforms emerged, they were insanely effective for a low investment originally, right? So everyone got on the drug because it was like, this is amazing. I can reach for a cost per click or cost per conversion, all those metrics. It was just like a no-brainer. And you look at TV and went, TV is for TV's for grown-ups, and it's like, it's just out of reach, right? But that paradigm has flipped on its head now. And actually, if you look at, I mean, this is where, Karen Nelson Field is doing some really interesting work. If you look at the actual attention you create based on the platform, suddenly it's inverted the pyramid the other way around and went, well, hang on a minute, there's certain channels like TV or YouTube where you enjoy really rich, well, it's a rich media because, or podcasting must be like way, way, way out there in terms of like. And this is the weird thing with podcasting because sorry, we're going to bounce back now, aren't we? But the other thing is that there's no SEO. There's no like I'm going to buy banner ads on podcasting. And I mean, I know you can insert a 30-second ad at the beginning of the show. I've resisted that because it wouldn't be authentic. I don't want to do that. And you know, for the £5 check I'd get once a month, it's not worth the disruption to the experience. But you know, podcasting is amazing. Where was I going? Oh yeah. So anyway, but what seems to have happened is there's a massive course correction, I think, going on where suddenly the people are going, we've been on this drug for 15 years now. And actually, the prices have been going up because they've captured and they've dominated the market. And actually, now when we look at what we're actually getting in terms of attention, not just clicks and eyeballs, it flips on its head, doesn't it?
Well, it's funny because its TV has been booked out in Australia for the end of the year. So last month I was talking to some people like most of the spots gone, pre-booked. So yeah, it's funny when you start optimizing for different things. The reach looks really good and cheap on some of the digital mediums, but then you do a CPM comparison, you do a CAC comparison, you start doing these modeling, and it's like it really flips. And you know, medium is also the message to an extent. So do I want a fleeting attention down a scroll that nobody really cares about, or do I want captive attention where we're going to have a rich experience and a cinematic sort of feel? And yeah, cinema advertising is taking off again as well, which is interesting. So
yeah, I love cinema advertising. Yeah, it's probably the closest we've got to podcasting, isn't it? As in, you've got an audience that are there just for you. They've paid. Well, no one's paying us. It's just a bit of a shame. Maybe they will. But anyway, but
the geographic targeting of cinema advertising is like amazing.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, it's amazing.
So if you have any local business, it's a no-brainer. But anyway, you did mention some books during a conversation, but perhaps there's one right now that has really changed your mind for the better and that you'd recommend the readers to read.
Oh, that's so good. Well, look, I'm not allowed to not mention the Dark Lord himself, How Brands Grow, right? So I'm assuming everyone's read that. If you haven't read it, read it. I won't count that as my one. The one I love, the Dark Lord, that was Mark Ritson, by the way. It's funny actually, when I had Byron on the show, right? I said to him, Mark Ritson calls you the Dark Lord. What would you call Mark Ritson? And he said,
oh, I know what he calls him, but I'm not allowed to say.
Well, the answer on the podcast I thought was a real backhanded compliment. He said the world's best journalist. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Oh, that's what I said. Okay, yeah. I'm like, yeah, I know what he meant, and I think that's good. Anyway, the one I like, the book I probably recommend that is under recognized is actually called The Founder's Mentality. And it's very, very interesting. So it's written by these couple of guys, and what they did is they looked at founder-led organizations versus corporate organizations, management-led organizations. And I think it was they used the Standard & Poor's 500 to do their research. Now, what they found is that founder-led organizations outperform management-led organizations by a huge degree. It's a really unknown insight, this actually, because the perception in VC land or private equity would be that founders only get you so far. You need professional management teams to come in and do the job properly. And founders kind of end up outstaying their welcome very often, right? You know, like a Jack Dorsey at Twitter or, you know, whatever, or something like that. The founder's mentality is brilliant. And this is the insight I think most people don't appreciate, that with founders, you've got so much. Well, what they found out is that founders are much more likely to be connected to the customer. They have what's called a frontline focus, they call it. So they're more likely to be directly connected to the customer and understand what the customer needs. They're also a lot more obsessed about execution, and they have kind of a real ability to execute well, rather than be stuck in management meetings, that kind of thing. And there's also a kind of owner's mindset. And the owner's mindset basically means you make good decisions. You act as if you're accountable, all those kind of things. And what they do in the book is they brilliantly illustrate the characteristics of a founder that make a business successful. And it's a really easy book. It's got brilliant data, but I think some of the concepts in there are not that widely known. But what I like, the reason I call this book out is that my experience working in small businesses and big businesses absolutely endorses that book. That the way I was successful in a small business is exactly by doing the things, acting like a founder, and all the principles that are contained in this book. So yeah, that'll be my plug.
I've got one for you because that reminds me of another book that I just stumbled across, which is called Barbarians to Bureaucrats. And it's by Lawrence Miller. And he's got this really interesting sort of like life cycle of the business, sort of, curving, growth phase, back down again. And he typifies it. Again, it's like, it's not really empirical evidence, but it's just sort of his business experience of you need different people at different phases of that business. And when you're in big brand, you have a lot of the administrators and bureaucrats, and then they call the aristocrats at the bottom, which are the sort of overlords, right? As the company sort of declines into its sort of level of stasis. But at the beginning, you need those go-getters, those they call them barbarians, and that growth leader who's very close to everything, knows their figures, knows the customer. And I think maybe that's just another way of saying it.
I love that, and you know, and as well, just to balance out my own advice here as well, there in a big company there is a corporate skill which I'm not very good at, right? I'll admit that in terms of navigating an organization, and I mean, some people will call it politics, right? But it's the ability to know how to get things done, how to influence people, how to make decisions go your way, how to get resources. There is a skill that I'm not that good at, but exists, that makes certain people very successful in corporate life and climb the ladder, even though technically on their subject matter they may not necessarily be the best. They have this other skill that makes them successful. I mean, make of that what you will, but it's not necessarily a skill I want to be known for, but it's a skill that I can admire in others.
I think you have got to have a lot of patience to do that. But yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's really funny. Okay, what about a piece of tech that helps you do your job better? It could be software or hardware.
Ooh, very, 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 very good. I'm a bit of a technophobe, so I'd probably say email. No, I'm joking. So um, yeah, microphone. Yeah. Actually, genuinely, what I, if I'm allowed to say it for my podcast, actually, I genuinely, I love, I love transistor tracking. I love being able to track, downloads and followers and who's listened and how things have gone. I love the technology in podcasting actually, because it's rich. It's high, like we're doing Riverside at the moment and stuff like that. So yeah, I'd probably say Transistor would be my favorite, because I do check my listeners and downloads every single day, and I get a little kick from it. It just gives me a confidence boost and a bit of it makes my day. So yeah, there you go. It's motivational.
Okay, well, I think you're hitting numbers a lot higher than mine, so I'm still a bit jealous. I think you're hitting some pretty big ones last time we chatted, so that's great. And congrats, that's awesome. What about a website resource that you'd recommend as well? Could be any website on anything that is kind of like your little secret source website you want to divulge.
If I could do a mini plug, I'll do a tiny little plug. So, well, actually, it's quite funny. We are trying to do this. Sorry, we're not trying. We are doing this, but we've created a platform called Test Your Ad. It's basically like a WeTransfer, right? So if you've got an ad, you drag and drop it into a place on Test Your Ad. We test it overnight, and then within 24 hours, you've got a diagnostic report telling you how to make your ad better. It's frigging cool. But I'm assuming I'm not allowed to say that, but
So for the light buyer market, right?
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're spot on. So, obviously for heavy buyers, they can phone us up and we'll tell them everything. But for a light buyer who you do one ad every year or whatever, you can just go and upload it. You can pay on a credit card, get your results. It's £2,000. You know.
Hey, I'm going to use that. 2000, is that all? Okay, well, that's pretty good. So the very PLG or product-led growth, or if you want to use some PMF, product market fit kind of thing is there.
Yeah. No, no, no. You're right. Actually, so sorry, I've cheated and plugged my own.
I think that's good. I mean, for £2,000, if you're going to make like a 10 or 20 or $50,000 media budget, I mean, it's kind of worth it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. And look, we've designed it with that in mind. That's the point of it. We want to make ad testing available to the masses, and we want to make it quick. We want to make it useful, and we want to make it good value. So there you go. There's my pitch.
What about and you might have to think about this one, but what's a quote or a meme about something we sort of mentioned today around big and small brand or marketing or whatever that just makes you laugh every time because it's so true?
Yeah. So Rory Sutherland's going. System one is the Oval Office. System two is the press office, which is a really clever articulation of how our mind works. Yeah, that's not a bad one. Sorry, I'm doing very badly at not plugging myself.
Oh, okay. Speaking of that, the next one is what do you want to plug? So you sort of you hit me to it. So tell me about what you're doing, what you want to get the word out there.
Well, I'll give two answers then because I've got two strands. So, on the podcast, obviously, Uncensored CMO is there to help marketers understand the good, the bad, and the ugly of marketing. So, bit of a plug if you want to, subscribe, please do. And then the secondly, from a System One perspective, my day job that pays my bills. The biggest thing is that we want to make marketers more effective, and we want to give them the tools to do their job and help them make the case internally for the power of creativity to transform their brand. And we're doing that by making ad testing really available, easily available, and delightful as well. The thing going back to my simple approach that I talked at the top of the show, I've designed it with my team to make it beautifully simple and informative. So it's I think the biggest hack ever is make it easy, because I think basically every company makes it difficult. And actually, apart from tax avoidance should be difficult, right? But apart from that, make it easy, right?
And applying for welfare, they intentionally make it more complex so you don't apply for welfare. Well,
or getting compensation for something is incredibly insurance claims incredibly difficult. But anyway, but that aside, I think the biggest advice I think I've learned in my career is if you can make it easy for people, they're much more likely to do it. And so we're trying to make the business of ad testing super easy.
And if people really connect with what we're talking about today or tonight, or when they're listening, what is the best method to maybe contact you personally that you prefer?
Yeah. Well, on LinkedIn, so Jon Evans, that's John without an H, which is you'll find me there. So I'm relatively busy on LinkedIn, less busy on Twitter actually. I haven't quite found my Twitter level yet, but at Uncensored CMO. Yeah, I think that's I haven't jumped in on all the hot topics. Yeah, I might make my debut soon, but yeah, I'm observing more than entering the debate. So, but anyway, tweets are open, DMs are open, all that kind of thing. And then System One wise, it's my name, Jon.Evans at systemonegroup.com.
Hey, well, thanks again for your time, Jon. I know we've been going back and forth for a while, and I've always wanted to have a chat with you, so I really appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on the show.
Nice one. Cheers, Jon.